you so much for having me today. As she just said, I am the Master Gardener Coordinator here in Kent County, Delaware. We were talking about how small Delaware is. It's only got 3 counties, and I'm happy to be here today. I know New York is a lot bigger, and most of you, that's where you are from. Today, we're just going to talk about some tips that I like to share with my Master Gardener volunteers and other community members about cleaning up your garden for the winter. So the first thing I'd like to say is discard any dead or dying plant material. That's really going to give you a great head start for next year. You're going to have a lot less disease and pest problems if you do discard anything that is dead or dying. The second, of course, you can always continue removing weeds from your garden beds and vegetable garden areas. Removing weeds at any time is a great idea just to help prevent some of the weeds from coming next year. And then the third, of course, we're talking about IPM and, how to use beneficial insects and incorporate them into your garden. So leaving some areas kind of untidy, if you will, over the winter definitely is beneficial for some insects to live throughout the winter and then for birds to eat some seeds. While they're scavenging and looking for some things to eat in the wintertime. So overwintering beneficial insects, these include things such as bees, butterflies, fireflies, and moths. A lot of people, when they're thinking about cleaning up their garden, they want to get rid of all the leaves and just tidy everything up. And my first suggestion is don't do it. So underneath that leaf litter, in the ground and then in some of the stems, you're going to find, overwintering insects that you want to leave there that are beneficial for you for next year. So I always encourage people to leave some plants standing for the winter time, even if they look a little scraggly. It is really beneficial to the invertebrates that live in that area. So consider leaving even a small part of your garden over the winter. So if you live in an HOA where you're not allowed, sometimes you can just kind of make it look tidy, or even adding little signage could help educate your neighbors or people that are interested in the area. That I know the Master Gardeners, we have several demonstration plots where we'll just leave a little sign that says, the insects are resting. Please don't mind our messy appearance. We'll be gone in the spring, or something like that, just to let people know that you're not just abandoning your yard. You're really leaving it there for the insects and the birds to munch on through the winter. Prepare your perennials. So it's going to be a big decision whether you decide, you just can't take it. You've got to prune some things, or you are going to leave them for the insects and the birds. So some good examples are purple coneflower. That's my favorite go-to to leave there for birds over the winter time. Asters are also really great for leaving the stalks there for insects. And another thing you want to do is you want to mulch your flower beds, but when you're mulching, try not to mulch too heavily. When you mulch heavy, sometimes it can put a damper on the insects that they're currently trying to nest there for the winter time. So like I said, leaving some food for the birds. These are just my specific favorites. American Beautyberry is beautiful, and it's a great source of food for birds. Purple coneflower, this image here, one of my very favorites. Serviceberry, spicebush, viburnum are all great examples that you can leave for birds to munch on throughout the winter time. I always include natives into my garden beds. I'm not specific to natives. I will plant some things that aren't native to my areas, but I really like that concept of, you feed what you have with what you have. So you've got your native plants that help, feed your birds and your insects that are native to your region. It only makes sense. They eat what they know and what's native in their area. Consider a bird feeder. So a lot of people will supplement with bird feeders in the wintertime for our feathery friends. So you'd like to place feeders near branches. You can put them at different angles and different kind of heights, if you will, to attract a variety of different birds. And there's a bunch of different feeders that you can get. One thing I want to say is you want to make sure that you keep the area clean. So there are some there's some studies where birds will come and they'll eat some of that dead and decaying bird seed at the bottom, and they will die because of it. So if you keep your area tidy, if you see that a bunch of the bird seed is falling out and it's kind of creating like this like dense kind of wet mat of bird seed, break that up and discard that, just so that you're not contaminating the area, because there are some birds that specifically like to eat the seeds on the ground. A lot of birds will eat up high, but there are some that specifically like to kind of go all around the ground. And then I always encourage you to clean your bird feeders. If you start seeing that they're getting a little bit gunky in the corners, whether we've had like kind of a wet winter, you can always take them down and clean them with a 10% bleach solution, dry them completely, and then refill them with the bird seed of your choice. So once again, weeds are a problem always. So I encourage people to pull all of those weeds out. The more you can pull, the less you have to do for the spring. If you kind of get rid of it now, then you're a step ahead when the springtime comes. And some people will compost weeds. I encourage you not to, unless you know that your compost pile is hot enough to kill the weed seed. And I would never myself put weeds that have gone to seed in a compost pile. If you pull them before they go to seed, it's not as big of a deal if your compost pile gets hot enough. But that's just something to be mindful of. You don't want to just keep making weeds based on your compost. So that kind of just segues into trying home compost if you've never tried to do compost before. So this is kind of a step-by-step. I also included a resource at the bottom here. West Virginia University has a really great beginner how-to, if you will, step-by-step with how to start home composting. So carbon source would be something like shredded leaves and straw, newspapers. Nitrogen source would be grass clippings or any kitchen waste that you'd like to put into a compost pile. And kind of the magic number is 2 parts of carbon to 1 part nitrogen for a successful compost pile. And of course, if you chop the items up smaller, they're going to break down quicker. If you throw a big pile of sticks in your compost pile, it's going to take a really long time for that to start working and break down those sticks. One key is never to add any meat, dairy, or fat to your compost pile. It's just really a no-no. It can bring out different rats or mice, and you really don't want that added to your compost pile. And then for a successful pile, you want the core temperature to be 120 to 170 degrees. And how do you test the internal temperature of your compost pile, you might ask? You can buy a thermometer specifically for your compost pile. And like I said, if you have a really hot compost pile, it is warm enough to kill any of the pathogens or diseases or weed seeds that you might have added to your compost pile. So another thing for overwintering your vegetable garden or your perennial beds is you want to use some mulch. So straw mulch is preferred to hay. I know that people have used hay before, but sometimes it'll end up bringing in potential weed seeds, especially I know personal experience. I had taken over a community garden and they had mulched with hay the previous year, and then I had weeds just coming out my ears in the spring. So unless you know where your hay is coming from and it's clean hay, I would avoid using any hay for your mulch layer. Natural hardwood is also preferred, especially if you're using native perennials. I try to avoid any dyed mulches or anything like that when I'm laying down my mulch for the winter. And then, of course, anything that's dyed has been treated with chemicals. So that's just something I prefer to not do. And then now is a good time to top dress your perennial beds with some of the compost that you've either created, or you can also purchase some good quality compost from many different resources. So hazard tree removal, this is something that you can remove dead, diseased, or dying tree material at any time. It's really not the best practice to prune this early if you're just doing regular pruning of trees and shrubs, but if it's dead, diseased, or dying, my recommendation is to prune that anytime. So any of your other pruning that you would need to do, you can wait until the late winter or early spring once that tree is you're sure that it's still dormant. And then also, this time you can still extend your vegetable garden. So we recently purchased some row covers, and a master gardener did some cold frames at a community garden that we have. So she's still able to have lettuce, spinach, carrots, broccoli, cabbage, any of your cold season crops. Of course, I know that New York is a little colder than Delaware, but that same concept does apply. Using row covers or cold frames can help you be able to harvest even later into your growing season. So some lawn care techniques. So mow your grass until it stops growing, and then mow once more once there's leaves on your lawn. Leaves make a great mulch for your perennial beds. So if you could break any of those up, if your neighbors allow and you don't have strict HOAs, breaking those leaves up and kind of tucking them around in your perennial bed is a great idea for the beneficial insects. However, you don't want to leave big patches of leaves on your lawn. It's really not beneficial to your turf grass if that's something that's important to you. I know some people are trying to go into the trend of eliminating their turf grass, and they want to put in all these perennial beds and meadows. But I know here in Delaware, we tend to have quite a few lawns, and if you leave big patches of leaves, it can really give a detrimental start to that grass in the spring. We also want to fertilize in the fall, 2 to 3 weeks before the ground freezes. And then at your latest mowing, if you want to mow a little bit shorter, it will help prevent some fungal infections in the spring. So I do encourage you to do one last mow, and then you should be good to go until the spring comes around. So this is a great time to test your soil. So this is something that a lot of people don't think about in the wintertime because you're kind of, on the tail end of things. But if you take a soil sample now, it's a great time to know where you start for next year. So you can test your soil for your pH, your nutrients, just so you know kind of where you stand and what you might need to amend your soil for a successful grow for next year. So I know here in Delaware, we have local resources. We have a few different labs that do testing, and then we also have it at the University of Delaware where they will test your soil. So I encourage you to, send your sample to your local extension office. I'm sure that there are plenty there in New York. So how to take a soil test. This is just really quick and basic. So you'll remove any plant residue at the top of your soil just to expose just where you want to test. For turf, we recommend 2 to 4 inches in depth. And if you're taking, they say if you're taking about an acre worth of soil, you want to take 15 core samples. So then you take those samples, mix them up in a bucket, and then package them up. And always contact your local extension office if you have any questions. If you're testing your vegetable or your garden beds, we recommend 6 to 8 inches in depth. Using a soil probe is probably the easiest way, even though you could use a shovel or a different type of core collector of your choosing. But again, you can buy those readily on the internet. I don't want to say any brands, but there's a big mega store where you can buy pretty much everything, and soil probes are on there, and you can get fancy ones that have foot pegs and everything on there as well. Now's a great time to harvest the last of your herbs. You can harvest them to dry them. They make great holiday gifts, and with all this holiday cooking. So thyme, rosemary, oregano, all of those things are kind of on the tail end. I know for us, like we just had a few hard freezes, so like our basil is done and things like that. But there is still some rosemary that can be collected. So we encourage you, don't forget about the herbs that are out there. You can still get one last collection in, and you could dry them. A time to prune your brambles. So use good sharp garden shears. It promotes good airflow and prevents diseases for next year. Encourages larger fruit as well. This goes for blackberries, blueberries, and raspberries. And then I did put in here for strawberries. Now's a great time to mulch them to give them a little bit of protection for the harsh winter months that are coming up. Turning off irrigation. I know that this can be really costly if you forget to shut your irrigation system down. You can always call the company that installed your irrigation and get them to drain it out and winterize your system. Don't forget to drain your garden hoses, especially if you don't have any horses or animals that you're feeding through the winter. Draining those hoses is super important for the length of your hoses to be able to keep them year after year. If you leave water in them, they tend to break down quicker. Also, if you have any buckets or containers that are holding water or pots for containers, you don't want them to crack when they freeze in the winter time. So just kind of doing a scout of your yard and dumping anything that could potentially freeze with the cold season coming in. And then cleanup. This is a great topic that I've talked about before. We had a master gardener, Tom, that was he loved sharpening tools. So every workshop or any chance he got, he would come out and help sharpen tools. And one of his many tricks were to mix motor oil with sand, a bucket of sand, and then you can kind of take your hose or your shovels and just kind of keep them winterized during the winter months. So the first thing is, of course, removing any debris from your shovels. Using a wire brush is really preferred. And then, of course, any pots that you have that you want to reuse for next year, to use a 10% bleach solution is really a great way to get rid of any pests or pathogens that could be lingering, and then they're ready to go for that next season. And then, of course, you want to plan for the spring. Do you want to expand your garden, or did you grow too much of something that you didn't eat, or your neighbors didn't like it and you grew too many squash? Those are all things to think while they're still fresh in your mind for the next growing season. That's why it's really important to record what happened. So even just creating a map of your garden and where you planted a specific crop, or where you might have put in a new perennial that you're curious if it's going to last throughout the winter months. And then just even a notebook. I know a lot of times different garden clubs and master gardener events, they'll have even a garden calendar or a garden journal where you can just take notes of what worked well and what didn't. Thinking about crop rotation and how you don't want to plant the same vegetable in the same spot this year, and you don't want to forget what you planted where. I know that's been a problem with some of the gardens we've had. We'll forget where we planted things. That's why it's really important to keep a roadmap with your successes and your challenges. You also want to think about, maybe you want to do a second planting of something. Let's say you started to plant squash and you ran out, or you had a squash borer infestation. If you plant in succession, you might have better luck with the later season squash, or the other way around, the early season squash did better. And then also recording temperature and rainfall. It might help you remember why in the spring, if some of your perennials have some dieback, or the trees weren't doing as good, did you have more rain or less rain this year? And was your crop more or less successful because of the increased rain or temperature that you had the previous year? And then, of course, thinking about, what are your goals for next year? Do you want to expand your garden? Do you want to downsize your garden? Do you want to add more natives? Do you want to try to plant a tree? And then, if you do plant a tree, what can you plant under that tree? And gardening can be a lot of fun. And even in the winter time, when you're not seeing the fruits of your labor, just thinking about what you want to do for next year. Looking through your seed catalogs or looking through your bulb catalogs and seeing, what could I do better, or what could I do different next year? The winter is a great time to plan and to dream of what your garden's going to look like in the future. So I know I talk really fast. but those were kind of my tips for winter care and putting your garden to bed in the winter. So I can answer some questions. I do want to give a disclaimer that we're not supposed to mention any brand names or particular products. And we also are a non-discriminatory university here at Delaware State University. So
great. Thank you so much, Megan. I really appreciate that presentation. I think in the interest of time, we're going to move on to our next speaker. If you would like to scroll through the chat, and if there's questions you'd like to address in the chat, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, I can follow up with you by email. I think I did see a question about how to dispose of things. Do you compost them? Do you burn them? Do you put them in the trash?
Perfect.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So if you want to stop your screen share, and then we'll have our next speaker. You can pull your slides up. So our next speaker for our IPM Minute is Dr. Saravanan Thangamani, and he's the professor of microbiology and immunology at Upstate Medical University in Syracuse. He and his lab work on diseases carried by ticks, including they've done some really great work looking at the distribution of different tick species in New York State, and also the distribution of different diseases that those ticks are carrying. So today he's going to be reminding us to keep doing tick checks in the fall in order to prevent tick bites. And Dr. Thangamani, if you could swap your displays. Right now we're seeing the slides with the notes. Perfect. That looks great. All right, you are all set, and hopefully you are able to unmute yourself. If not, I will do that for you.
I was able to find it. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. And I know with the time limitation, I'll try to rush through. This is a kind of talk that I typically don't give, but I'll do my best. I'll try to provide all the information for everyone. So I'm from Upstate Medical University, and I want to kind of throw this slide first to show that what are the current emerging and current and emerging tick threats to humans in New York State. Everybody knows that deer ticks is present throughout the New York State, but that carries the Lyme disease agent, also cause disease carrying agents that causes anaplasmosis, babesiosis, POAS, and virus as well. In addition to the deer tick being the prominent tick that causes human health concern, or disease of human health concern, we do have Lone Star ticks, we do have dog tick, and the exotic tick, or it's no more an exotic tick, Hemiphysalis longicornis, Asian longhorn tick, is slowly emerging from the tri-state area and all the way kind of expanding its geographic range to the northern, western, and central New York. And recently, we also identified a new establishment of a tick that's called Gulf Coast tick, otherwise known as Amblyomma maculatum, as you can see from the map here. As the name suggests, the Gulf Coast tick, it should be present in the Gulf Coast of the United States, but now we are starting to see all the way up in the New York State as well. So with that brief introduction to the ticks, obviously not all the diseases that are transmitted by the ticks, or the agents that are transmitted by the ticks, we do not have a proper vaccine. We do not have a vaccine or anything. So the only way to prevent getting a tick-borne disease is not having tick bite. If you have a tick bite, we'll naturally have a greater chance of getting a disease. And the best way is to prevent ourselves from getting tick bites. And so I'm going to go walk you through what are the different ways how we can actually avoid getting tick bites. The first thing is, before you go outdoors, you need to do some information. You need to gather some information. You need to do something before you go out so that you can limit your exposure to the ticks. First, know where to expect the ticks. That's very important, to understand where the ticks are actually living and waiting for you to come close by and they latch on you. Ticks live in grassy, bushy, or wooded areas, or even on animals. Spending time outside walking your dog, camping, gardening, and hunting could bring you in close contact with ticks. Many people get tick in their own backyard or in their neighborhood. When you do gardening, this is another thing that you have to be watchful for, are the ticks. And also you can use mapping dashboard like our lab that has, it's called a tick tracker tool, where you can actually click on each county to find information, what kind of ticks are in your neighborhood and what pathogens they carry. So this gives you an information for you to know where the ticks are and what risks, what are the risk areas in the New York State. So you can be better informed and you prepare yourself for that. And you can find this, live active map at www.nyticks.org. And then before you go outdoors, you can treat your clothing and gear with permethrin. You can treat your boots, you can, camping gear, and that gives protection for longer term. I would say I use this method every spring. I treat my clothes with 0.5% permethrin that I buy from Amazon. Any brand is good. And I spray it dry, and then it's good for several washing. And every year I do this. So for me, it's a great way to protect myself from getting tick bites. Alternatively, you can go to a hunting store or a camping store. You can get permethrin treated clothing and gears as well. That is available. In addition to that, you can use the EPA approved insect repellents that contains DEET, picaridin, and oil of lemon eucalyptus. Unfortunately, I don't want to go to the brand name because I'm a state employee. I can't endorse anything. So if you look for the insect repellent, read the ingredients, and if you find they have 15 to 20% DEET, and if it is a picaridin and oil of lemon eucalyptus is something that I personally use because I don't like to have all the chemicals sprayed on my skin. So I use oil of lemon eucalyptus. Those are really good repellents. Again, they only stay for a short time. If you get drenched in the rain, they wash off. So, you have to use these in combination with, you have to treat your clothing and gear and then apply insect repellents as well. So people have to remember that they have to use insect repellents like they use sunscreen for their skin protection when they do outdoor activity during summer. And then avoid contact with ticks. As I said, since if you know where the ticks are, you can avoid getting in contact with the ticks. And I always advise, this one thing that I always advise everyone is walk in the center of the trail. If you walk in the center of the trail, you will not have any contact with the tick. And the other thing is that you have to make sure your pet is also walking in the center of the trail. We give long leash to the pet. The pet always wanders off the trail, comes back with the ticks on them. So it is something we have to be watchful for. So that is before you go outdoors. But after you come indoors, so you have to check your clothing for the ticks. Ticks may be carried into the house on clothing. They might be still crawling. They may not be on your skin. They might be on the ground. Any ticks that are found, you have to remove it. If you can't see the ticks, but assume that you have a tick, and then put your clothes into the dryer, high heat for at least 10 minutes. That will kill off the any remaining ticks that are on your your outdoor clothing material. And also examine the pets. As I said, the pets always wander off, come back with ticks. You have to examine the pets. And here is an image that I picked up from the CDC that clearly tells where to check your pets for ticks. Around the ears, in and around the ears are the primary things, around the eyelids, under the collar, under the front legs, between the toes are the most important things we have to look for it. Ticks like to hide in places that are hard to reach or groomed by the pet. And also showering within 2 hours of coming indoor is highly advised. And also showering help you to wash off any unattached ticks. And it's a good opportunity to do a tick check, right? And here is an image that, again, I pulled up from the CDC website showing where you have to do the tick check after you come indoors, around the hair, around the ears, inside the belly button, between the legs, around the waist, under the arms, and back of the knees. But primarily, I advise people to focus mostly on the lower waist area. That's where ticks like to attach. Most preferentially like to attach. So if we can combine, preventive measures as well as, before and after coming indoor, I think we can actually essentially prevent having any tick bites. If we don't have any tick bites, we essentially prevent us from getting any disease as well. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any question you may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thangamani. That was some great tick information. I think I did not see any tick questions in the chat. You gave us a lot of great information to look at. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Megan, for your presentation as well. Thank you all for joining us today.